All right, and my next guest, I'm honored to have her on the program here, Terri Rockovich. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
Appreciate
hosting me.
that.
Of course.
In the Emmy building, we're having the Emmys here last week, and it's been kind of a little crazy place going on here. So,
I noticed.
Yeah.
Not a bad place to be, though.
Not bad at all. So where did you come in from? Where do you live?
I'm in West Hollywood.
Okay.
Yeah, so not too far.
And you're not from California, though, right?
I'm not. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So do you want to leave the cold, or I want to hear that story? So how did you end up from Pittsburgh to Hollywood?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Okay. So I spent the first 25 years of my life there. I went to school at a small Catholic college called St. Francis University, and then immediately went back to Pittsburgh and got my first gig at an agency. Moved in with my best friend and just like lived my best life for the first 2.5 years post-college, but then started to get the itch to not only leave the agency life, which was a hard and intense one, and potentially move to the brand side, but then also just spread my wings and try a different environment. So I looked for an opportunity that kind of provided both of those things, which led me to San Francisco, and then I've just hopped around ever since. Interesting.
So let's digest that a little bit.
Yeah.
So Pittsburgh. What were you like as a kid?
Oh man, I was like a child that liked everything.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, that is demonstrated through a bunch of things, but it was like I wanted to play every sport. And I also wanted to like do ballet and be a cheerleader.
Okay.
I loved animals, and so I was most inspired to become a vet. And then that kind of professional desire changed to delivering babies, and then it changed to being a lawyer. And so it was just kind of like everything felt interesting to me.
Sure.
And so I think, you know, as a kid, that kind of shows up as just generally like blooming where you're planted and leaning into things, and some things didn't feel right, either by way of like not being instinctually appropriate, or, you know, just certain crowds didn't feel right for me. But I think generally speaking, like I like a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so I just ended up being, you know, engaged in a lot of different activities and teams and friend circles and so forth.
So you had some busy parents taking you all over the place.
I did.
This practice, that practice.
I did.
Here.
You know it. Yeah.
What did your parents do for a living?
My mom was in journalism,
Okay.
and she ended up being a speechwriter for executives at Westinghouse, which was a big company, one of the bigger companies based in Pittsburgh. And then my dad was a civil engineer and worked for the U.S. Army Corps for his entire career.
Is that right? Was
Yeah.
he military too? Prior military?
He was not. His father was.
Okay.
But no, he held the same, you know, the same type of role, and then moved up the ladder at the same company for over 35 years and had a beautiful retirement in swan song. But it's funny because he was always so structured and pragmatic, as engineers are. And then my mom was kind of like the dreamer, and the one that was very encouraging in terms of trying new things and taking big risks. So it was nice to have that dynamic, like someone to keep you grounded, and then someone to kind of like push you into the deep end and lead you to believe that she was there to jump in, you know, if you start to drown.
Yeah, that yin and yang.
Yeah.
So, was there yellow towels at your house? Are you a big Steelers fan? Is that like, that's like a rite of passage, right?
Yeah, it's beat into you. I moved around, so I've lived in San Francisco, New York, Austin, and now LA, and like I'm not allowed to like any other sports.
You're
team.
not, no, right?
It's black and gold all the way. So yeah, lots of terrible towels, and of course you have to have education on the 3 primary sports teams, so Penguins, Pirates, Steelers, but I still rep them, you know, whether they're having great seasons or not so great seasons.
Oh, die hard, yeah, that's just...
You have to.
And the funny thing about it, like I've got a couple friends from Pittsburgh, and you guys kind of speak your own language, right?
Absolutely.
Isn't Utes, or what is that one word?
Yins.
Yins, that's the one. Yins, right? It's funny when you go to, like, I got a funny Pittsburgh story. So I have a digital marketing agency. We'll talk a little bit about that. And so we had a meeting in Pittsburgh, and it's like we're going to be meeting with like a new potential partner of ours. And so it was me and my partner, Chris. And so like we're running late to the airport, right? And we're going to be in Pittsburgh for like 4 days. And so we get to the airport. We were in Atlanta at the time. And so we pull up to the airport and like, we're not going to make this flight, man. We better like run. So I'm like, he's like, what about our luggage? I'm like, just screw the luggage. We're not.
Oh, wow.
So we ended up getting on the plane and just going to Pittsburgh in the middle of like dead winter, right? And then we show up and the people that are picking us up are like, where's your bags? Like, oh, we don't have.
Oh my gosh.
So we ended up we went to like a Target in Pittsburgh, and we got like jackets and shirts and this. And so we just kind of just lived on the edge, but it gets cold there. But the people there are just amazing. The food there, it's a cool place to grow up.
I'm very proud of it. I would say, like, when I went to San Francisco and then New York and I was just having these different exposures, I had kind of like really craved that culture and wish, you know, I had experienced it sooner in life. And I think I was running and really excited by like everything that felt new and fresh and flashy. But I think now, being more resolved in my mid-30s, I'm so proud of growing up there, and it really is a charming town. And it's made a lot of progress, I would say, like in the past decade, in terms of the art scene and the food culture and all of that good stuff. So it's really nice to go back.
And you said you grew up in a big Italian family, is that right?
Italian and Polish, yeah. Okay. But as you can imagine, the Italian overrides.
Oh, yeah.
All. So it felt very Italian. That's the only type of food I can cook. It's the only type of food I can qualify. So, I identify more as Italian than anything else.
Oh, and like big Italian families.
Oh, yeah.
I come from it myself.
Yeah, you know.
There's always drama and this and that and food, and I can't believe they got you this for your birthday. I got them that, right?
Yes.
There's all of that, like the drama, right? Yeah.
They live hard and love hard.
Sure do.
And fight hard.
They sure do. So now, as a kid, did you ever have any type of entrepreneurial like spark? Like, were you doing anything entrepreneurial as a kid or what?
Yeah. I mean, was definitely that kid who was trying to rally the neighborhood kids to kind of get together and like monetize something, whether it was selling the stuff that we didn't want anymore. I sold my brother's Legos at some point.
Hopefully he knew about it.
Yeah, he didn't.
Of course he did.
But I was like the lemonade stand attendee, and like I would bake with my mom and then try to sell that stuff. And so there was this really weird attraction to just like monetizing things, and like I really valued cash in a way where I hoarded it, but I felt very entitled to then do with it what I wanted to do instead of having to rely on somebody else to grant me the money or tell me how I could spend it. And I think honestly I still have that same mentality today, like having my own wealth kind of enables a sense of power and authority, and unlocks confidence in a way where, you know, I value it in a way that I think is balanced and even, but allows me to really kind of drive my own decisions instead of having having to ask for permission. Yeah,
having more control. Now, did you have like dogs as growing up? Or like a big pet family or what?
Big pet family.
Really?
Yeah, I think the most animals we had in our household at any one time was 13.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I mean, we lived in a suburb, and my parents had a nice big lot with some property, but I mean, these were all domesticated, like under one roof animals, and so we had dogs, cats, hamsters, snakes, fish, ferrets, and hamsters.
All at the same time.
And gerbils. Yeah, all at the same time. And so I was a huge animal lover, and even through college, I adopted or rescued one animal per year. So I had a cat my freshman year, a cat my sophomore year, a dog my junior year, and then another dog my senior year. And my dad at one point was like, okay, it's like the animals are me. I'm moving out if you bring
Your dad was
one
a saint if he allowed that many animals in his house at one time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I would like hide them, and I'd be like, it's my responsibility. They'll live in my room.
Sure they will.
And, you know, my parents ended up really like eating the burden of
as we
pet
all
responsibilities.
do. I'm living that right now. I've got my son wanted hamsters, so we got 2 hamsters. We've got 2 dogs. We've got fish. You know, like
a farm.
Yeah,
a little
farm, right?
Yeah.
But I'll take care of them. Sure, you will, right?
Yeah.
The water's empty. I'm rocking up there to fill up the hamster water, right? Yeah.
So you know.
I do know. But sometimes I can get out of control. Like the good thing is back when we were growing up, they had all the, you know, puppy stores and stuff. And you walk in and the puppies are in the window. And it's like, can we get them? And it's like, how do you say no to your daughter or your son, right? And sometimes it just happens. So a lot of that when I was a kid. Yeah.
So at the end of the school year, my mom would give us a gift or let us choose the gift we wanted. And so my brothers would go and get like, you know, like a wrestling figure or like a Nerf gun or something like that. And I always asked for a pet.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so I think that was part of like my accumulation strategy, was just like I ended up with a lot of animals, and sometimes they overlapped and sometimes they didn't. But yeah, I've just always been like very attracted to animals, and then also building a bond with them and like training them and being really proud of, you know, an animal that can't necessarily like speak your language, understand you and listen to you. Like that was very prideful for me. So, and I still am. My dogs, we had some people over for dinner last night and everyone was like, your dogs are so well behaved. And that's like the biggest compliment you can get as a pet parent. So I'm still very prideful of that aspect of pet ownership.
They love you unconditionally. So for me, like I was never like a cat person. Like we never had any cats. I think I had allergies to them.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me was, I remember, so my mom would clean houses. That's what she did. And I would go with her, and I never forget it. Like I was like, went in a room and there was like a cat, like a nasty cat. And it was like gonna attack me, and like, at least this was my perception as a young kid. Maybe it wasn't going to attack me, but it was like hissing at me, and like, and so from that moment I was like really scared of cats. And like my whole life I never like owned a cat, and it's like because of that childhood trauma that I had.
One traumatic experience informs the rest of them.
That's right. Yeah. And it's probably not the right way to look at it, but as a kid, like that's kind of that's your whole world, right? That's what you think of.
Yeah.
Have you, now being like an animal lover, did you have any incidents where you got a little too close to a dog or they bit you or anything like that? Or,
I was bitten twice.
Okay.
One because I think the animal just felt scared. There was a lot of people entering a friend's house. It wasn't my animal. And I had gone and tried to grab his collar because I actually thought he was going to go after the group of people that entered the house, and he bit my wrist and didn't let go. And
so like stitches kind of.
Oh yeah, it was definitely the most severe of any incident I've ever had with an animal. So my family usually rescued labs and golden retrievers, and so that was the primary breed we had growing up. And one of our retrievers was in the front yard and he was chewing on a bone, and I stuck my hand in his mouth, and he had bit down pretty hard, which also punctured skin and required stitches. So there were like 2 incidents, but I knew that it was not because of the dog.
Yeah.
And so it really just helped to inform the way that I reacted to animals, reacting to things. And so it was never a deterrent, I don't think, in terms of just like my relationship and my love for animals. Yeah. It's and here, like, I'm going to talk about Jinx, your company. Because it's funny how like that has led you. And I'm sure as a kid you said, you know, you thought about being a vet, but you never thought about like owning a company that. Well, I'll let you talk a little bit about Jinx. So before we get into Jinx, and I want to learn a lot more about that, but Whitney, our producer, has put together a little game here. And so let's see here. This is a game that we're going to play, and it's a dog trivia game. Ooh.
Right? And there's no winning or losing. You know, if anything, it'll be educational for both of us, but we'll just kind of see how much you know about these random questions.
Let's do it.
And I will say that we did have a Jeopardy champion on at one point. Scott Trum, his name.
No pressure.
And so his questions were really tough. Whitney gave him some tough ones. Yeah. All right. So we're going to ask 10 questions here, and they are all multiple choice. So it should be pretty easy.
All right.
All right. A dog's sense of smell is 10 times better than a human. 100 times better than a human or 40 times better than a human?
40.
Wow. Starting on the right foot. Nice job. Dogs are about as intelligent at what human age? So dogs are about as intelligent as what human age? 6 months old, 2 years old, or 1 year old?
I think it depends on the dog, because I have a shepherd right now who's brilliant.
Okay.
I would say 2.
And you are right.
Okay.
Good job. 2 for 2. True or false? A dog's nose prints is unique and very similar to a human's fingerprints.
True.
Good job. The sound of yawning, this is a true or false question, by a human is also contagious for dogs.
False?
It's true here, but it might be an isolated kind of a thing, right? Maybe it's not, but it's true on this one. But so far, you're doing pretty good. And we should test that out later with our dogs.
Yeah.
Just go yawn and
well,
see
I'm
what
like
they do.
reflecting, and I'm trying to think like I know it's contagious with humans for sure.
Oh, it totally is. I don't even know how that even happens, right?
Yeah.
It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what it triggers, but now I'm definitely going to test it with my pups.
How many pet dogs are there roughly in the United States? 75 million, 100 million, 125 million.
Ooh. So the last stat I heard was 90.
Okay.
So, and I'm actually unsure if that's like domesticated or total population.
Sure.
So
It's a loaded question.
I'll go with the middle number. I think it was 100.
100. Yeah. It's 75 here, but who knows when this was taken, and it might be a little bit more, especially with COVID, a lot more dog owners.
Oh yeah.
Happen in COVID.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a little higher, but on this paper it's 75.
Okay.
Let's see here. A person who hunts with a beagle is known as a brace, a beagler, or a check cord.
Where did you get these questions?
She's looking at Whitney, not me.
Okay, what were the options again?
So this is a person that goes hunting with a beagle.
Okay.
And they refer to themselves as a brace, a beagler, or a check cord.
I have never heard either of those, any of those words.
Go with the more obvious one.
A beagler?
Yes. There you go. I'll throw you a bone there.
Thank you.
Pun intended. See?
I grew up in Pennsylvania. I feel like I should know this. I've got relatives that hunt, but not with animals.
What kind of dog's sense of smell is so accurate that it could actually be used in the court of law? This would be either a basset hound, a bloodhound, or a German shepherd.
Shepherd?
It's actually a bloodhound.
Oh, man.
I do a lot of work with lawyers, and I had no clue about that. See?
Yeah. So I have an older rescue who has hunting dog and hound and beagle in him, and he can't smell for shit.
Really?
But my shepherd, on the other hand, it's like if we're eating dinner outside and he's 2 rooms away, he will awake from a dead sleep and come and find the food.
Is that
so
right?
That's it
Okay.
was more anecdotal than anything. But I mean, it makes sense that it's a hound because they're used so often for sport. So
There it is. What Beatles song has a frequency at the end of the song that only dogs can hear? A Day in the Life, I Want to Hold Your Hand, or Twist and Shout?
This is a fun one. I'll go with a Twist and Shout.
It's A Day in the Life. Now I want to go listen to that song.
I was going to say.
And I guess I wouldn't hear it anyway, though, right? If only a dog can hear it. I do that sometimes.
That's cool.
Like I'll go to YouTube and I'll play those sounds that dogs can hear, but I can't hear. And you see them like turning their head and looking at you. And like, I don't even hear anything. What do you hear here?
Oh, man.
Right? True or false? The Golden Doodle is the most popular breed in the U.S. according to the American Kennel Club as of 2021.
False.
You're right. want to take a guess at what is the most popular
like a
breed?
retriever or a lab.
You're right.
Yeah.
Good job. Labrador Retriever is the most popular. And the last question. You did pretty well so far.
I started strong.
Yeah,
I don't know when I fell apart halfway through.
Some of those were like statistical questions, right? You know. Where do dogs sweat? On the back of their coat, through their saliva, or through the pads of their feet?
Oh, that's a good one. I'll say the pads of their feet.
And you would be right.
All right.
So
started strong, finished strong.
You did finish strong.
All right. Let's delete what happened in the middle.
Hey, you go by our editor at a Starbucks or something. He'll make you. There it is. Awesome. Well, thank you for playing along.
Yeah, that was fun. I learned
fun.
something new, which you can't say happens every podcast interview.
That's right. Yes. All right. So before we kind of get into Jinx and learning a little bit more about your business now, I want to learn how you kind of even got to where you are. So you graduated college. You said you were working at a digital marketing agency. Is that right?
Yep.
And what was your role at the agency? What were you doing?
So, I mean, I started entry level and I was like an account associate. And so I'm sure you're familiar with like the leveling that happens at agencies. And so I was just like pounded with all of the shit work.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was like a lot of late nights and research and preparation and editing of client deliverables and just the stuff that like the account managers didn't want to do. And so I had graduated in 2007, 2008 hit, and there was
worst time,
the financial crisis. And so in addition to kind of being like the lowest ring on the totem pole, we had laid off half of the staff. And so it was half of the resources.
But still having to fulfill the services that you were selling
completely,
to the client.
Yeah. And so it provided an opportunity for me to take on more client-facing work, which I really loved and just generally like leaned into. And I think, you know, net, it was almost like having worked with Fortune 500 clients and then really small businesses, I was attracted to the earlier stage companies. And so really early on in my career, I was like, of course, it's great to have millions of dollars to spend in terms of advertising, but I'm trying to get creative with much smaller assets. And just generally like a scrappier team and a flexible strategy was so much more interesting to me. And so when the opportunity presented itself to move to an early stage company, a startup, that was headquartered in Pittsburgh, but had raised some capital and was opening offices on the West Coast, part of me was really eager to step into a role with a little bit more authority and then also just the power to drive strategy and see results and not have to kind of work through the client as a filter.
Sure, or multiple clients,
Or multiple clients, And so being so much closer to the work was really interesting to me. And then also part of that was, you know, taking a role with the understanding that I would be relocating to San Francisco. And
where were you at the time?
I was in Pittsburgh.
So you were back home in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I was back home, post-college, kind of trying to figure out if my parents would even support that type of decision because I'm very close with my family. And they were definitely supportive. They encouraged me. They were like, it's a plane ride away. And so I stepped into that next thing and immediately just assimilated and felt so right about the decision. Relocated to San Francisco and then just really started to get a knack for being able to build like agile strategies and teams to execute that weren't necessarily interested in having like really defined or streamlined responsibility sets, but instead kind of became this like jack of all trades that could pinch hit in any one direction if needed. And so that was really where I started to think about carving out a track in startup culture, and then eventually, you know, became inspired to be an entrepreneur myself.
And what was the startup that you were working for?
I was working for ModCloth.
ModCloth, okay.
Yeah, so it's a vintage-inspired apparel company for women. And it was really cool, actually. The founders were a couple they started the business in her dorm room, and she was really just trying to exit some of the vintage items that she accumulated through her hobby, which was vintage shopping. And so it started off kind of selling one-of-a-kind pieces, and then grew into kind of just like a hosting point for a bunch of indie apparel brands.
Okay.
But it was great. I mean, I think, this was when social media really started to take off.
Sure.
In 2007, 2008,
That's
2009. Right. And so we were really early adopters of using social to drive engagement and favorability and awareness and customer acquisition. And so being close to the marketplace at such like an early and nuanced stage was really special, and I think like it was definitely a moment in time, and now it's a completely different ballgame.
Sure. And so how long were you there for?
I was there for 4 years.
So you were at the agency first for how many years?
About 2.5.
So you got a lot of agency experience, then you went over, got the startup experience, and then you ended up at Casper, is that right?
I was at Casper, yeah. So I was in San Francisco working for ModCloth. I just kind of felt like my time there had expired, in the sense that, I was brushing up against the ceiling, and it really didn't seem like there was much more upward movement or opportunity for me. So I started to host conversations, knew I wanted to go work for another really early stage company, had an introduction made from like a friend of a friend to an investor, a seed investor in Casper's business. And then I spoke with the guys there, and they had offered me a job, and I felt really unsure about relocating to New York and accepting a role at a company that hadn't launched yet.
So coming back from San Francisco all the way back to the East Coast.
All the way back to the East Coast. And then I was like, I will never make that move again. And here we are in LA, where I don't think I'm going to leave. But I was hesitant to make the move. I was hesitant to work for a company that hadn't launched yet. I was definitely, unsure about working with people that I've never shared a beer with, and I had never shaken their hand. Like, everything was done remotely in terms of getting to know each other and going through the interview process. And so I was like, let me come and meet you guys, and, let's start a working relationship. And if it feels great, then let's go.
Yeah.
And that just so happened to be a couple of weeks leading up to their launch. And it was almost like I knew immediately it was something special. I loved the founding team. And then, everything just felt really right, I think, in terms of their brand strategy and go-to-market position. And so it felt like I blinked and we were into the first year and just had found so much immediate success with, disrupting, I think, a category that was very ripe to be disrupted.
For sure.
At the time.
Yep.
And so it was really serendipitous, just in terms of like how we were introduced and how we connected and how everything just fell into place. And I think, to be honest, like that has been very much so part of my experience that has led me to where I am today. It's just meeting people and kind of like waiting for your orbits to kind of pass and connect, and certain things feel more right than other things. And so it really is just like using a bit of your gut to figure out like what you want to be a part of.
So what was your specific role at Casper? What were you doing there?
So I was the second employee, the first marketing hire. Yeah.
Wow.
I joined them pre-launch, and I started managing their advertising strategy and portfolio. So they were like, we've got $30,000 a month, like go triple it. And that was truly the mandate. And so I was really tactically setting up digital campaigns, like performance-minded campaigns, to make sure that money was like invested in working media,
getting the best ROI from.
Of course,
of course.
the deal. And so my goals were pretty straightforward, but because of the immediate success and ultimate trajectory of the business, it changed really fast. And I think like in those 4 years, not only was I able to build out teams of like complete rock star performance marketers or integrated marketers, but we eventually scaled that budget to $7 million a month.
Wow.
And so it was having kind of like in the trenches experience about starting, a media portfolio, building that foundation into something that felt very significant, and then I had hired probably like 60 people. I think by the time I left, I was managing 62 people. And I had inherited a couple of different marketing functions. And so, like, again, it feels like such a ride and like, you know, a fast one at that. And I don't think I even appreciated my growth in the moment until after I was past it.
Sure. Yeah, well, the thing about Casper is they had such a cool story too.
Yeah.
Right. It reminds me of like Zappos. Like when Zappos first started, they were like, how do you disrupt like selling shoes online, right? And what they did, which was so brilliant, was they made their customer experience their story.
Yep.
Right. And that is how they got all the media and the attention. It was more about the customer experience and not so much about the shoes anymore, right?
Yep, totally.
So it was pretty fascinating. But Casper is similar to that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were there at Casper for how many years then?
I was there for 4 years as
4
well.
years,
Yeah.
okay.
If you notice, there's like a
pattern.
That's the vesting cycle if you've got common stock within the company, and so it's like you kind of like burn yourself out for 4 years and then you're ready to
See,
pivot
I wasn't
and go do it
catching
again.
on to that.
Yeah.
See, okay, so that's cool. So while you were at Casper, you met a lot of interesting people, and some of which is it one or two partners?
Two. Yeah. My co-founders today were former co-workers at Casper and also part of the founding team.
And so how did that, you guys all love dogs and you guys socialized together and you had this wild idea? Or tell me a little bit more about how this kind of even, like the genesis of this.
Yeah, so we were first coworkers and then just eventually, as you can imagine, became really great friends. So we worked together pretty intimately cross-functionally, especially while we were still a really small team. And Michael, one of my co-founders, was the only person I would leave my dog Blitz with when I traveled.
Okay.
Like it was a very short list. Yeah. And sometimes my mom would drive in from Pittsburgh and stay in my place in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and watch my dog. And if she was not available to make that trip or stay for a week, then Michael was the designated dog babysitter.
Sure.
And so we were all pretty dog obsessed. Casper had moved around in terms of offices, but was generally dog friendly. And so I'd bring my pups in and everyone was just kind of like, you know, ultimately really inspired to be entrepreneurs, but also disrupt another industry that felt outdated and antiquated. And, you know, I think that buying dog food can be like such a monotonous task where you try to be thoughtful, but ultimately there's like a million other things to be concerned with. And if you've got children, like there's definitely a level of priority, right? And so I had definitely my own drama with my dog and all of his health issues and his picky palate and, you know, feeding him something that he enjoyed but was also good for him.
And what's your dog's name?
His name's Blitz.
Blitz, okay.
Yeah. And then I've got another dog and a cat. But he has been, he's just been like my homie and my best friend for the past decade. Yep. So I adopted him when he moved to San Francisco. He was like, I think I moved to San Francisco in what would have been like the summer of 2010. And then I adopted him about 6 months later because we had a dog friendly office at ModCloth. And I just wanted like a companion.
Sure.
And I was meeting a lot of really new people, but it was like he was such a great conversation starter because one, he looks like the most bizarre kind of like stunted in growth Dalmatian, but he's not.
Really?
He's just like this mystery mutt of like a bunch of different breeds.
Okay.
But he became like really like a family to me. And I felt very responsible for taking care of him. And he just had a host of health issues. And so when we moved to New York, and those complications got more serious, our food journey together was just a tough one. And I was like, you know, you think about the category and of course everything's consolidated at the top because it's owned by big CPG, but there's so many options, which creates like a lot of noise and a lot of congestion. And when you go through trying like 10 and then 15 and then 20 options and nothing works for your animal, it's confusing and it's really frustrating.
Sure.
And I think we hit a point where he had a pretty severe back injury. He went through surgery and then had this kind of corresponding rehabilitation that was really dependent on clean diet because his nerves were regenerating in the back half of his body. And so he just couldn't put on weight or else that would be a huge obstacle
For
in
his back,
him
sure, yeah.
recovering and regaining ultimately his mobility. And so I was cooking for him. I was ordering fresh food. I was trying to mix that with some type of dry food, because if I fed him wet or fresh, it was not great stool quality. And so it was just like nothing presented itself as an easy solution for us. And Michael and Samir, my co-founders, were kind of along for the ride, because it was such a traumatic experience for Blitz to go through this kind of life-altering event that left him partially paralyzed in his back legs. And they saw how it affected me, and they were incredibly supportive through that journey. And then also when we came together and we were kind of kicking the tires on a business model, like this just felt so right in terms of introducing a new brand that was not only compelling and easy and convenient for the dog parent, but then also just better for the dog in terms of superior quality and as measured through digestibility, which is like the animal's ability to retain essential nutrients, measured through stool quality. So if you're picking up your dog's poop every day, like you can tell if it's good or if it's bad or if it's easy or if it's hard. And so in that sense, we were just kind of like so hungry for a brand that resonated with us as consumers and was just generally better for our dogs.
Yeah, it's interesting how most businesses start with a need, and it seems like that's the case. So Michael, and you said Samir?
Samir, yeah.
Samir.
Yeah.
So what's their background? What were they doing at Casper, right? You were doing marketing. What were they doing?
So Michael is one of those guys who's like truly a jack of all trades. He started in finance. He came from MakerBot, so he was working for another early stage company, really supporting the executive team. And then he came to Casper to start the customer experience team, which he grew to be the largest team at the company in a mere like 2 years. And then he pivoted to the ops side of the business, where he really supported kind of planning, logistics, and supply chain. And so he had exposure to like almost every single area of the business.
All his strengths were a lot of marketing people's weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right? I know how that is. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And he had just mastered kind of like all of these back of house areas.
Yeah.
And he's just so technical and so analytical. And so it's really nice to have that filter, especially when you're building a business and details matter, especially as you're kind of like solidifying the foundation. And so he moved from customer experience to ops and just generally has like financial acumen. And so that's kind of his skill set in a nutshell. And then Samir was more of like a biz dev partnerships guy. Okay. And so he supported partnerships of all shapes and sizes. So we did a partnership with Target with a corresponding investment where we popped in their stores and we sold the entire assortment plus some SKUs. And he managed that deal in addition to how it was launched and how we partnered post-launch. We had a pretty cool partnership with American Airlines where we provided stuff to their first class and business class flyers. And so he managed that. He would manage marketing partnerships. He would manage influencer relationships. So he kind of touched all aspects of partnerships. Interesting. And just generally is like well networked and like really adored within his network. And so it was really cool when we were fundraising. He got us so many conversations that like I could have never, doesn't matter how charming I am, like I could have never gotten, just because he had a great reputation. He had, you know, like a warm introduction. And I think it really just enabled us to have like a pretty seamless fundraising process to raise our seed. So I want to back up a second. So it sounds like 3 really smart, savvy individuals that got this brilliant idea. And it's really hard because first of all, you guys all have secure jobs, right? You're living, you know, your life. This is a big risk, right? Yeah. It's like, huge. What are we going to do here, right? We got this idea. We're going to be competing in $100 billion industry with like competing with like companies like Mars, you know, right? Like, who are we on this little spoke? How are we going to be able to do this, right? So you had the idea, like, what was next steps? Like, how did you move from turning it from an idea into like, okay, let's
were you working like part-time at night on it for a little bit and eventually you guys left the job, or like what was how did that work?
No, we kind of just ripped the Band-Aid off.
You did?
Yeah, and took a hard pivot and then like really rallied around the idea and the business model and building a pitch deck. And I think the more that we learned, the more that we realized that we needed venture capital to fund the idea, because the minimum order quantities in this category are so high that it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a small production run. Because to your point, big CPG is running tons upon tons upon tons every time they go to manufacture.
Yeah.
And so we realized that we needed to be capitalized to really do this right, and do this right being like hiring the right people to run product strategy, and then also working with the right manufacturing partners to make sure that we were kind of at the best of the best facilities in terms of all of the food that we were producing, because at the end of the day,
that's your product.
Food, yeah. And it not only has to be superior, but it has to be safe for the animal. And so those aspects were most important. They were also really expensive to fund entirely and fund well and the right way. And so we really pivoted and started focusing on fundraising and just like capitalizing the business.
So you raised seed money initially.
Yep.
And that was more to kind of engineer the product first. So you weren't selling anything yet. It was just,
it was all R&D and pre-launch.
And that's really complicated. I want to kind of tune in here, right? Because like now you're trying to determine like the pre-money valuation of a company. Right? And talk to me a little bit more about how did you determine that? Like, did you get consultants to come in?
Licked our fingers and stuck them in
Is that right?
wind. Yeah. No, listen, we had done so much like industry research, and we really started to get our hands around the landscape and the potential of this business if it were to start chipping at the market share that's available within the category, specifically for the type of food format that we wanted to design and offer. And so, you know, we understand the multiples, we understand what the potential is with the capital that would get us through 18 months. And so that's how we kind of arrived at like a ballpark valuation that felt fair.
Okay.
I will say, I think that, you know, being pre-product and raising money only happened because of the reputations that we built at Casper.
I see.
I think coming off of that brand, and I guess it would have been like 2018, where it was really at its height in terms of success, opened up conversations and doors within the venture community that I don't think we would have had the right to hold unless we were coming from one of these like unicorn startups with such an amazing story.
Because that's really what they're investing, is the people.
Yeah.
More, even sometimes more than the product.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So were some of the Casper investors interested in kind of looking at you, or what?
Yeah. So, yes. So we had a lineup of you know, venture capitalists that we pitched and we got feedback from. Some of them who we were friendly with because of the pre-existing relationship at Casper. And then the Casper founders also invested in our business, which just, it felt like a vote of confidence, so to speak.
Yeah, so you weren't really leaving the company. They were going to like ride on the coattails of 3 smart employees.
They were really supportive.
Ah, yeah. I see.
Yeah.
So, so now you're raising money and you're like, what are we going to call this thing? Like, and it's probably like, it's like we were talking about like naming your child in another episode. Like, so how did the name Jinx come up?
So Jinx was my co-founder's first dog.
Ah.
And all of us liked the name. Like, I think he threw it on one of the mock-ups that we had in our deck just as like a placeholder. And it truly resonated with all of us. And I think like the branding exercise can be a challenging one because people usually just have different preferences. And so there often is debate in terms of like how you bring something to life. And, you know, the strategic positioning piece is a little bit more objective, whereas like the color system and the language and the visual aesthetics are definitely like driven by preference and what you assume will resonate with your target audience. The name from the start, even though it was added as this placeholder, was just, it just felt right
It was just the placeholder for a little bit.
It was the placeholder, and then we were like, it resonates. It feels great from a design perspective. It was really fun to play with in terms of like logo and tagline, and so we just ran with it.
And I'm sure you had to consult with attorneys and trademarks and all of that fun stuff. Were you able to get the domain jinx.com?
No, we were not. So
yeah, that's
it's
complicated.
It's a gamer brand, and a big one at that. And they've got a very tight hold on it. So we're thinkjinx.com.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah. No, that's the thing is, we had a domaining person on our show, a guy by name Braden Pollock, and it's a whole interesting world.
It is. Well, so I have a couple of other friends who are entrepreneurs, and the price that they've paid for their domain name, like a clean domain name, is insane.
Yeah. I own my last name, Hennessey.com.
Okay. Wow.
And it's a cognac, right? You know, talk about a big company, and I'm surprised they never kind of came in and scooped it up. So when I first tried to get that domain, I reached out to the owner, and he's like, this was like 10 years ago because I wanted it. And he's like, yeah, you can have it for $500,000. I'm like, what? I think he was just like hoping that like Hennessy cognac would reach out to him and give him that kind of money. I'm like, I'm in no position to do that.
Sorry.
So like later on, when we're thinking about rebranding my agency, Scott Shrum, my partner, he's our COO and president. He's like, why don't we see if we can get Hennessy.com? It's available, right? And the auction was like, it says like starting out at like 50,000.
Oh wow.
So I'm like, okay, well now we're kind of in the ballpark. And so I reached out and I said, hey, you know, I'd love to buy this domain. Would you take 25,000? And like literally like an hour later, he's like, no, we're looking to get 40. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't have 40. I said the most I'd be willing to pay is 30,000. That's it. Take it or leave it. And he's like, all right, if you can get this paid today, we'll do the deal. And so I got my last name, Hennessy.com, which is kind of cool because like my email is my first name at my last name.com. Right?
Yeah, that's
and
really
talk
cool.
about how many conversations that starts when you're at like Old Navy or wherever, right? You know, like what's your email? Like, how did you get that name, right? And so I paid $30,000 to get that name, right?
Which truly feels like a discount from the original position.
It sure does. Yeah. It sure does. And believe it or not, so like Hennessy Performance is a big like car company, and they don't even have it. They have Hennessy Performance. So once I bought that domain name and I started to market it a little bit, somebody tagged him on one of my social channels, and he reached out to me like right away saying, hey, would you be interested in selling this? And I'm like, to be honest with you, I'm like, I'm about to build my whole brand on this. I said, I just paid, I didn't tell, like he didn't have to know how much I paid for it, but I'm like, I just made this acquisition. I said, if you wanted this domain name, you know, you're gonna have to pay me 800 grand.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, well, let me think about it. And then he never got back. This is a guy named John Hennessy that owns that company. But yeah, so it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, wild story.
Yeah, that world is was crazy. Yeah. So now you've got the name of the company. You've got some initial funding. Now you're looking to start hiring people or what?
Yeah, so we were a team of 3 with the biggest gap in terms of skill set, like really living in the product department. So we hired a consulting team that served as product strategists. So like they really advised on everything from R&D and testing through manufacturing and food safety. So they filled that plug, which really like rounded out the team from a skill set perspective for the first 12 months. And so we were really off to the races for about a year before we started to think about hiring. I will say, just generally speaking, like if I could go back and do it over again, I would hire sooner, just because we waited until we were ready to launch. And then, as you know, hiring can take a really long time.
Sure does.
From like sourcing and recruiting through the interview process.
And you didn't have an HR person to help you. You guys were doing it, right?
No, we were doing, we were doing like all of the LinkedIn stalking ourselves.
Yeah.
And just networking really aggressively. So I think we waited a little too late to start to build out the non-founding team. But we did secure some really good talent, I think, just like by way of decent timing. And then we could have never prepared for what we stepped into, which was like the height of the pandemic.
That's when you launched, right?
We launched in January of 2020.
That's like the worst time to launch a business.
Yeah. So we had I
guess it could be seen as maybe a good time if you're like looking for employees though, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So we soft launched the brand, and we just wanted to make sure like the website was working and product was getting where it was supposed to go, and customer reception for like that first 1,000 customers was favorable, and everything was kind of manageable from a customer experience standpoint. But then we were getting ready to announce, and that brought us to March and April, and I would say like that's when stay-at-home orders started to go into place, and that's when the world really felt like it stopped.
Yeah.
And so we didn't do a formal announcement. We were just like, it's not appropriate to launch, to announce the launch of a dog food company. And furthermore, like there was this crisis happening in the world. The political arena was hot. And so we just didn't feel like it was the right time to talk about what we were doing. And so we just started to map in some marketing spend and grow the brand through like digital means only. So some media, some partnerships, but really postured ourselves as opportunistic in the sense that we knew that on-demand delivery had become a thing for people that were used to buying their staples in stores. And so we just tried to start to become accommodating and create multiple access points besides our own digital storefront to have food available for people who couldn't leave their homes, were afraid to leave their homes, didn't want to go in stores, or they couldn't go in stores because doors were closed indefinitely. And some of the smaller pet stores don't have the capacity or the logistics, frankly, to do curbside pickup.
Sure.
And so what we heard from, that first tranche of customers was this was the only thing that was available to me in an on-demand capacity. So we partnered with Postmates. We did on-demand deliveries in LA and San Francisco, but I mean, that had added so much incrementality to our business just by way of being like a convenient, healthy option. That it really kind of gave us a lot of momentum to then kind of have a tailwind, in the midst of this pandemic, and really give us, I think like some awareness that maybe we wouldn't have been able to get even through like a formal PR announcement.
Sure.
Just because, it was well timed, and I think just generally like accommodating people's needs.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because during that time, while it is a pandemic and people are kind of like staying at home, but like I said, a lot of people are adopting dogs, and it could be the perfect time to launch a new disrupting product.
There is some silver lining, I think,
right?
In the sense that, I would imagine that some of you have heard the news, like there was this Clear the Shelters campaign. And so historically you'd go in and there wouldn't be like enough room to house the homeless animals. And it was like you'd go into shelters and like maybe there'd be one dog in some instances. Like the stuff that made the news, the shelters were entirely empty, which is great because people, opened their doors to animals, not just dogs, but really like expanded their families. And then that obviously had an impact on the category.
Yeah.
And so we saw some like really nice trends develop just specific to our industry, which ultimately benefited us. But I think like also just leaves us feeling good that actually part of our like ethos is to give back. And I've got 2 rescue dogs. Both of my partners have rescue dogs. And so we partner with local shelters to give a % of proceeds back to those shelters. Or if we've got excess product, we give them product.
Okay.
And so there's like this donation component or like charitable aspect built into the model. But it's something that is very close to us in terms of us being able to relate to it because we've pulled animals, homeless animals, into our homes. And then also I think it's just like the right thing to do.
Sure.
And so it means a lot that like certain things that were great came out of like a pretty unfortunate situation.
Sure. No, that's a good way to look at it. So one of the things is that, so now you're starting a new company, but now you're into this new world called e-commerce, right? So that's a whole nother world, right? That now you are in like supply chain and logistics and warehousing and stuff like that. Where's your warehouse at?
Indianapolis.
So it's in Indianapolis, okay. And you ship like just domestically or what?
Domestic U.S.
Domestic
for now.
U.S.
Yep.
Okay, got it. That's a big investment.
It is a big investment. Yeah, I mean the logistics for this industry are complex.
Oh, yeah.
More complex than you would think for pet food. But, yeah, we manufacture domestically. And so, like, we try to keep everything within arm's reach, so to speak, so we can be on site during production runs and make sure we're running our own food safety and testing. And I think it gives us a little bit of assurance in terms of having confidence in what we're putting in bags. It's like that's the same stuff we're feeding our own animals. And so I think it should be really high touch in terms of being able to oversee and have some control of the production process. So yeah, so it's logistically complex, and Michael oversees that aspect of the business, and he's maniacal. And so I think like he really enjoys it, but it is detailed.
And so do you remember when you sold your first bag of dog food? Like, were you guys all high-fiving or what? Like, what did that look like?
Yes, but my sister-in-law was our first customer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So she placed the first order, which she takes a lot of pride in. But the second order, and then the third order, and then like the next 10, I mean, we just had champagne flowing the day of launch, and we did like mini toasts, and we were really proud of what we were doing.
Of course.
And to be completely honest, like whether it succeeded or failed, like it had been such a labor of love and like a real passion project. We were just happy to kind of like introduce it to the world and finally have it like living and breathing.
And what was the marketing channels that you were using initially to acquire your first like 1,000 clients?
Facebook, Instagram, Google.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I had built like so many different media strategies and portfolios that we started with like performance marketing as the foundation of our efforts for customer acquisition. And so we were fishing in the same, you know, body of water everybody else was. But I think ultimately, like, we felt different than a lot of the legacy dry format brands that we were competing against. And so we saw a lot of just really great engagement and activity from what we were doing specifically in paid social.
I can see it. I mean, I see a lot of businesses that just only operate that way.
Yeah.
And they do very well. Did you ever think about, this had to come across your mind, or at least one of the partners, of finding like a celebrity to be like the face of the company? Or did you guys ever, of course you did, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like endorsement partnerships are definitely something we had success with at Casper. And so as we were thinking about like what we wanted to pull from that playbook as an application for Jinx, we knew that high profile investors would be like a really great activation tool to have in our back pocket. And so we had some high profiles invested in the business. And then when we launched, or when we had new products, or when we sent them something, they would kind of post on our behalf without that like transactional relationship, like a pay to play type of thing. And so that was pretty organic. And then we also structured an agreement with Odell Beckham Jr. And he's got like,
is that right?
3 massive dogs.
The Giants, like,
I think I think he plays for.
well, I think he did play for the Giants. He had like this amazing catch
Oh,
in
yeah,
like a
yeah.
Super Bowl. I remember.
Yeah, he's in Ohio
I'm not sure
now.
where he's at. Wow, that's cool.
I want to say, I think he's maybe the Bengals.
We'll edit
Bengals
it out.
or Browns.
It's fine. Whoever he is, this will not be aired.
Yeah. But he's an incredible football player.
Yeah.
He's a huge dog lover. Whenever he has to go to camp for preseason, leaving his dogs is like the biggest issue because he's attached to them so intimately. And so we structured a more formal influencer agreement with him.
Okay.
But we knew, just generally having like access to high profiles, communities or followers or fans or audiences was really important in terms of building social proof.
Yeah, you look at like Kylie Jenner and, you know, and you look at even Jessica Alba with the Honest Company, right?
Yeah.
Like, where did that company go? Like, to the moon. Wow.
Totally.
Right? I'm not discrediting her. I mean, like, I think she had a lot. Like, I think the Honest Company started out of a need because of her children, and she just wasn't happy with the diapers that were on the market, and they were leaving rashes and everything else like that. And she got involved behind it, and it became her passion. And now, it's amazing. Yeah. So it's interesting. So now you are what? about a year and a half into this?
2.5 because we
years.
we went through like the formation process and building our brand identity and formulating and testing product for a little over a year.
And so are you looking to raise more capital now? Where are you guys at?
Yes, we are. You caught us in the middle of a fundraise.
Okay.
So we're raising our Series A.
Okay.
And it's a pretty big round of financing. And it really is intended to support retail partnerships. So every retailer is looking to grow their category because there's more pets in homes, and they're really looking for premium postured brands. And so instead of us having to kind of go out and chase some of those wholesale relationships, we've actually received a lot of inbounds. And so whether it's mass retail or pet specialty or grocery, they're all really looking for brands that kind of attract a more youthful pet parent. And so we really kind of target millennials, which is the biggest segment or archetype within the pet category. And then also just frankly have like a great product so that retention and rebuy and replenishment is something that they don't have to worry about. And so we have a couple of really big retail partnerships launching this year and next. And so to support those, even from just like an inventory and PO perspective, is a lot of cash up front.
Sure.
And so we're raising money, and then we're also exploring some debt facilities just to help fund that. But it's been such a different experience than raising money at your seed, where you're pre-product and you've got a really great idea, but no data points. And so this time we've got data points, and this time we're getting a lot of feedback. And, you know, I would say the genesis of it is just like, how big can this be, and how do you build a moat to protect what you're doing? Because it's so easy for brands to pop up and frankly like copy and paste either the brand position or the product. So yeah, we're just really thinking about how to be most thoughtful about like protection and carving out a lane to really scale the business and do it in a meaningful way, but also like a fast way.
Well, I think the good news is that once you actually start to make money, like the investment gets a little bit cheaper, right, for you guys. And it in some cases it could get easier or harder. But it sounds like you guys are on the same path as like the Honest Company. It seems like you guys are doing big things.
Yeah, you know what? We're close. We are like ready to sign a term sheet, which once that is you know, firmed up, I think we're all ready for a vacation.
Good, you deserve it. So where do you spend most of your time? Like, what are you specifically doing these days? So
I would say my co-founders and I are all very operational in nature, and so we're pretty hands-on in terms of just like how close we are to the business and different practice areas within the company. We roll our sleeves up, and I mean, like, I'm still making copy suggestions for emails as the CEO.
Okay. So got to wear all the hats, right?
Yeah, we're still really close to everything. And we have a small team. So we've got 15 full-time staff. We've got a couple of, I call them permalancers, but they're basically full-time freelancers. Yep. And then we've got some agencies that support us. So broker agencies to manage our retail partners. And then, you know, media buying agencies and brand agencies to help with the continued evolution and position of the brand. Got it. So the team feels bigger than it is, but we still have more dogs than people. Okay. Which is like one of my favorite things to say. That's great. But yeah, we're still pretty hands-on. I would say in my position specifically, like, I oversee and touch every single aspect of the business. I'm definitely like a control freak, and so I'm really trying to work on that.
I was a control freak too. But you have to learn that there's people way more capable at every specific skill set that you think you are decent at, right? That was like my big wake up call in business was hiring a CFO and hiring a COO and hiring a chief of people success and you know, all of that stuff, right? Like, because I was okay at it, but that's not really my thing. Yeah. No, and I'm learning that. I think as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a CEO, like relinquishing control to someone with the expertise to
build out a team and map talent into their organization, and to your point, like do things better than I could ever do them myself, is something that I'm like slowly becoming more comfortable with. But I like, I think being part of a startup and startup culture is, being in the trenches. And so I really like being in war rooms and like whiteboarding with the team and mining through ideas and challenging people and giving them an opportunity to like debate the founding team, and really like helping them build some muscles about how they express themselves and offer opinions and have perspectives. And so I hope that part doesn't change, because I think that's what I've always enjoyed about a smaller early stage company. And that very much so, I think, just like generally energizes the team.
Yeah. So for me, another little tip that helped me that I'll share with you, I've never went down the route. I've never raised $1 of money. Like everything that I've built has always been kind of bootstrapped and just like reinvesting it into it. It's not amazing. It's just different, right? I just didn't know that world, approach. Right? But you coming from Casper, like I didn't have that experience of like how this worked, right? So that's why I probably didn't go that route. I was always like the kid that turned 25 cents into 50 cents and 50 cents into $2 and just kind of kept doing that, right? But a big thing for me was finding a coach, right? So I realized that I was really good at this thing called SEO, which right? And I've spent 20 years doing it, but now I'm a CEO, and I don't know if I'm really good at that. And so I recognized it, and so I found a coach. And the coaches kind of helped me. In life, we have coaches for everything. Like you played sports, you had a baseball coach, softball coach, football coach, right?
Yep.
But when you get into business, for whatever reason, like people stop that. And so that was a big thing for me, was finding a coach. My coach's name, I've got a lot of coaches, but my main coach is a guy named Cameron Harold. He wrote a book called Vivid Vision, which you should probably, if I wish I had a copy, I'd give it to you, but you should check it out. Because you should go into the future 3 years and document the vivid vision of what does Jinx look like in 3 years. Like who works, where are you at, everything. What does the color of the walls look like then, right? So do you have a coach or?
I do.
You do?
I do,
Good.
yeah. But similarly, I was introduced to Jeannie during my time at Casper.
Okay.
And so as I was kind of making some upwards movement through management and eventually onto the executive team, I really just needed like a leadership presence capability. Yeah. And so she was brought into the organization to help a handful of like director level people to kind of just up level into that next kind of VP type of seat, from like posture to presence and just generally like how you show up and where you spend your time. And I would say of all of the professional experiences or exposures I've had, like that has by far been the best investment. And where I've like had the most value.
They give you the shortcuts, the cliff notes.
Yeah. Well, and I think like similar to what you were saying, it's like they make you pause and breathe and take a step back. And I think when you're an entrepreneur and you're moving so fast, you don't take enough time to really think about the 5-year plan or the 10-year plan. Or if you do, it's fragmented because you're just thinking about like where you want to be and how to kind of make decisions today to get there. But I think creating that space was really helpful for me. And, I think even at Casper, I was just kind of like, I could continue to keep my head down and I could be here for another 6 years because I loved the founding team and I loved my team that I built and I loved my coworkers and my peers. But I was like, is that really what I want? And then it starts to trigger, another stream of questions about like why you're doing what you're doing and if you're passionate about that thing and how to qualify it. And so I think like it kind of initiated a little bit of inspiration about doing my own thing and what that timeline could look like, in addition to just generally giving me some tools, I think, to manage that experience and then also just give me some perspective.
Awesome. I love to hear about that. So important to have like a sounding board. Do you have a board of like a board yet or anything? Or you have?
We're forming one through this fundraise. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's another big key to successful businesses growing is getting a good board too. So one thing. Like whenever I've ever swapped out like my dog food, right? it's a little scary, right? Because what happens is you swap it out, and if you don't do it correctly, you come home to a mess, right? So, so what is the proper way? So, like, if people have been using a certain dog food, I think, what do we use? Blue something.
Blue buffalo.
Blue buffalo, right? What do they say? Like, so many vets recommend, you know, everybody kind of uses that language, right? So we use blue buffalo, and our dogs have been eating it for, you know, years or whatever. But if I want to switch, like, how do you recommend that to somebody that's listening right now that wants to try out Jinx to get dog food?
Yeah, so we recommend a 14-day transition.
Okay.
And it's essentially introducing the new diet in quarter increments.
Okay.
And so you take 2 to 3 days to introduce the first 25%
okay.
relative to the total amount that you're serving, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next, until you're fully transitioned. But it totally depends on the dog. I mean, like, my dogs can switch from, like, our salmon protein to our chicken protein from breakfast to dinner without any disruption to their digestive system or their stool quality. Other dogs take longer.
Just a little different.
Yeah, it depends on what they've been eating from a protein standpoint, how long they've been eating it, if they've got sensitive tummies. Like, it just depends on your dog. And I think, to your point, like, especially if you've had your dog for a few years, you typically know what the triggers are in terms of nutrition. And so we recommend 2 weeks, but it can take shorter, it can take longer, and you should really just kind of use your judgment based on, you know, knowing your dog.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into it. I'm sure they could find a lot of information on your website, just the educational aspect of it, right? Because when you have dogs, like, I got a 15-year-old dog and I've got a 3-year-old dog, and sometimes they eat the same food, and they probably shouldn't be doing that, right? I mean, so I'll be interested to kind of learn. I'm interested now about this. I want to go check this out and learn.
I would have brought you some product if I knew you had dogs.
Yeah. Well, I will go and be one of your customers, like your sister-in-law, and get some dog food.
The friends and fam support.
For sure. So for those that are listening and they want to check this out, the dog food, because this is a company that's going to the moon. And,
knock on wood,
yes. So where do they go, and how do they buy it?
Sure. So our website is thinkjinx.com.
Okay.
You can either purchase a la carte or through our subscription program. So because it's a highly replenishable item, you can set it up on a frequency anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, just depending on what the churn for your household looks like, depending on how many dogs you've got.
Okay.
And it's really nice because dog food is heavy. And if you've got a dog over 40 or 50 pounds, like, you're typically buying a 25-pound, 30-pound, in some cases, like a 50-pound bag.
Yep.
I've had to constantly make trade-offs about, like, if I'm going to carry home milk or dog food. And so this is nice in the sense that it's delivered to your door. We offer a base diet, but we also offer healthy treats, toppers, and dental chews. Okay. And so really, like, we're trying to own the pantry, so you can buy with a single brand through a single destination and get all of the things that your dog needs from a consumable standpoint. And so that's kind of the offering in terms of our digital storefront. We're also on petco.com, bloomingdales.com, rover.com, target.com, and in Target stores.
Nice.
And then we're continuing to expand through wholesale retail. Okay. And just growing you know, through omni-channel strategy as opportunities present themselves. All of our handles are at ThinkJinx, with the exception of TikTok. We're just Jinx. Okay. We got in early enough to get that one. But yeah, that's where you can find us.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to following the journey and maybe doing a follow-up interviewing to kind of see the growth here. And I really appreciate you coming. I know you're very busy in this startup. I still think it's a startup.
Oh, it's totally a startup. Yeah.
And coming down and spending an hour with me. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. It was really lovely.
Appreciate it.